Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician and an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. I've also shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now let's dive in. This is the third conversation that I have had with Naketa Ren Thigpen in just really a few weeks, because first I was a guest on her podcast. Then we chose to just arrange to talk because we adore one another and the conversation is dynamic and electric and there is so much to say. And I think it's one of those kinds of situations where we're never going to feel complete with conversing with one another. And now there's no need for third to be a charm because the first and the second were charms already. But I am so excited to share with all of you Naketa Ren Thigpen and one of our conversations together. So welcome so much, Naketa. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here too. I was trying so hard not to interject like, yes, girl, because we were loving on each other. We're going to do it again. Just time to record it. That's all.
Okay, well, feel free to interject. That's part of our electricity. You and I are going with the groove here. So there is so much to say about you, balance and relationship advisor with so many accomplishments and intricacies in your biography. What would you like my audience to know before we go further together?
Yeah. And I like how you said intricacies, which is termed for layers of expertise, because I know you rock with those intricacies too. I think if there was anything for them to remember is that my whole entire mission is about building stronger families at the end of the day. That's all I do. I work with power couples, married women entrepreneurs, a few bold leaders, but my entire purpose is to help them recalibrate so they can own their right to be intentionally selfish for the whole purpose of creating a new imprint for all the legacies to come so they can be stronger at the end of the day.
Okay, so let's be clear. We could spend 10 minutes talking about your qualifications and expertise, and just take it from me, that's the case. And let's dive in. And you use the word selfish as you just did. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm a nerd. I think you and I established that in one of our previous conversations.
Sexy nerds. It's a whole new breed.
It is. And we are champions in the same lane for that. When I started to read on the word selfish, I realized through the research that the word got into our lexicon, the Webster Dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, whatever dictionary you're connected to, back in the early 1600s by a Pentecostal bishop who told the women that were his patrons that were coming to him saying, we need guidance, we need support, we need help with having these difficult conversations to let our husbands know that we want choices of when our bodies will be touched. Ultimately, they wanted the right to say no. If you know anything about history, for those of you listening, in the 1600s, you were completely chattel. If you were married, you were the property of your mate, period, in the discussion. And unless you were on your menses, which is your menstruation, or you were actively delivering a child out of your hoo-ha, you had no right to say no to having someone enter anything into your hoo-ha or your yoni or your blissful sacred space, whatever you want to call your vagina. That struck me as so binding on so many levels, because this is a word that women use to hold other women down, let alone society pointing us out when we're taking time for ourselves or choosing to say no or to put up a boundary. You're immediately called selfish, and we do it to each other all the time. So as someone who loves to create new words, I call them Naketa-isms, I made an intentional choice, pun intended here, of whether I was just going to create a new word and, that would be my movement, my revolution, or to take one that was already so hindered by patriarchal systems and issues and challenges and redefine it. So I chose the latter. I wanted to redefine it. And I have. I redefined that entire word to mean a personal, intimate gift to create your joy. So to make it more positive and empowering, to own it, to take back some of the spaciousness and time and energy and boundary that we lost when we came to a word that none of us, most of us, had no idea even meant that it was to hold you into a place of slavery.
Okay. I have some topics that I want to talk with you about, and we're going to do that. But hearing you, I want to ask you something that you and I have never talked about or even indirectly referred to. And I had planned to ask it, but then you just brought it up in using the word slavery, because as soon as you gave that definition and placed it with 1600, have you also investigated how the use or the need, so to speak, or the context in which the word selfish was coined, how that correlates with the slave trade essentially beginning? I don't actually know when the first slave ship left Africa specifically. Of course, there have been slaves for centuries prior, but specifically African men and women and children becoming slaves in the Western world, specifically the United States. It's just very, I don't know when that first slave ship sailed, but 1600 is approximately the era. And that is when the word selfish, with the definition you just gave, was coined. I observe that, and that does not feel like a coincidence.
I don't believe in coincidences either. I actually haven't. Now that you said that, you're like, this might be a new dissertation for me. That is definitely something I'm going to look into deeper. I know from our studies of what we know about the African-American slave trade specifically, our timeline that we're aware of is 1619. And the word selfish got in the lexicon around 1634. So there was a little bit of space there. Is it connected? Probably. Do I know for sure? I don't, because I haven't actually gone down that rabbit hole. But thank you. And my husband thanks you for giving me something else to research. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's also very striking for me that you're talking about selfish as a term used for all women. But then the meaning, I'm saying this as a 53-year-old white woman in America, the meaning I connect more with the African-American experience in our country than I do with the woman in general's experience in our country. And so since all I have are observations, emotions, and open-mindedness, but not much data, I think we'll just leave that there as a question hanging between us.
Yeah.
But it does pave the way for my question about balance. You speak about the importance of balance in relationships, and I'd love to know, why actually does balance matter? I mean, when I've got a project going, the last thing I want is balance. I want to go with my creative juices, work long hours, feel the adrenaline, the gratification, the creativity, the turn on. Like, this has nothing to do with whether or not I'm feeling sexy. It's just balance is really not the value that comes to mind in those moments. So will you talk to us about why that is so core in what you offer?
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you're being so honest about when you're in that win and growth zone, when, you know, the candle is lit at both ends, that it feels so good in that space that you're in when your head is down and you're just in the flow of all of it. Those moments are totally okay, but they should not be the rule every day, every hour, right? You know, from being the intimacy doctor and doing all the amazing work that you're doing with couples, that if you do that, if you don't know when to pause, to slow down so you can make space for you to recharge and fuel up, you're not giving your lover any of the good stuff. You're giving the lazy stuff. Now, I don't know for anyone who's listened to this, if you ever had lazy sex, There's nothing fun about that. There's not a lot of orgasms that come from that, right? When you're exhausted, there's not much that you can enjoy, even if you are willing to quote unquote go through the motions. So you have to make sure that there's space there. And for me, the definition of balance or work-life balance specifically is making sure that you're willing to admit the truth of what you really want over the B's, T over B, over creating boundaries that help you achieve that truth as your reality. So if you are a human that's moving in a space of, I want it all. I want the career, I want the family, whatever the family, definition is for you. I want the business, the empire, to be a philanthropist. I want all these things. Well, if that's your truth, you have to put some boundaries in place so you can achieve that. For me, that's all balance is. It's not about a 50-50, 70-30. Like there's no scale there in that term. It's really what makes the most sense for you accomplishing whatever you say is the truth of who you are becoming. And if you are destined to become someone who has no space for anyone, who never wants an orgasm, who never wants to go on a date or have passion or excitement, then you're going to stay in that win and grow zone all the time and never breathe and have anything left for yourself. So for me, that's really what it means.
Okay. Super clear. I've shared about myself. What I'm about to say is not really about myself, but I have a particular client in mind. She is a super successful, super high achieving, really fantastic woman. When I am coaching her and her husband, she's really responsive and I think surprises herself how much she has access to when she slows down in the context of our coaching sessions. But that is new for her. Mm-hmm. And so she has some number of decades of great success focusing on her professional accomplishments, getting new clients, organizing things in her business, making sure her children are taken care of. She actually has pretty much no time to herself except in a hotel room when she's traveling for business and working 12, 14-hour days. And she highly values her marriage. She said that in terms of her truth, that's what she says. I'm not saying that you would conclude that if you followed her around with an activity tracker, but she highly values her marriage and really doesn't know how to add all of that up together. How would you approach that with her?
Yeah, I'm glad that you have this example of a client because she sounds like a lot of our clients as well. Mm-hmm. Ambitious, powerful doers, right? Like they get things done. They're well accomplished. Their portfolios are amazing. They're not often able to make space to optimize themselves the same way that they optimize their career or their business, the checklist of sorts for whatever that looks like. For a lot of our clients that come to us that are dealing with the same attributes and characteristics, my first goal for them is to not shame the fact that this has worked for you up until this point, up until the point that you're now acknowledging this is no longer working for me, right? It's okay. It was your survival skill. You did it. You accomplished. You're amazing. Woohoo. Now to go to the next level, to be more amazing, if she's willing to recognize it, you and I both know that's the very first step in anything is awareness. And then the second is she has to let go of her version of what success is. If that version is actually what she's saying, I feel disconnected from it. It has worked for me, but something is wrong with this. Maybe she's in a new life cycle. Maybe she's no longer 30 something and has all this energy. Maybe she's 40 something and menopause is kicking in and estrogen is lowering. And, there's some changes to her internal rhythm, as well as maybe whatever's going on with her externally that's making her see the world different, is to not shame yourself, but to be kind enough to say, thank you, former self. Now I need to make room for, as Michelle Obama would say, who I am becoming and where, right. And where I'm going in that. And once you're able to do that, you can look at the emotions that are attached to it. Was it guilt of not making a certain amount by a certain age, so you still feel connected to the number? Not necessarily saying that your client is driven by money, because I know there's a lot of people who are not driven by money, but money was the easiest milestone marker for them, or a certain amount of property, or certain number of clients, those kind of things. They had these numerical markers that they held themselves to, and it used to feed them when they were young. But now they're like, ugh, I feel like it's a job to just continue to do whatever that version of myself is, instead of being in a space of bliss where I get to be spontaneous. Oh my God. Oh, an ambitious woman who's spontaneous, like that's never heard of, right? Because we plan everything so we can get all the things in on one day, even though we're not fully present to enjoy them all, because we're already 5 paces ahead. You and I think we're talking about this offline, just the various accomplishments that you don't necessarily have space within yourself to even celebrate, like reflect and celebrate. You just had 5 clients tell you something amazing. So what, you're looking forward to 100 this year. Those 5 did something amazing. That one did something amazing. And to slow down and appreciate that so you can attract more of that energy is absolutely what you want, especially when you're in another space of understanding that you don't have to make all the things happen. You just have to allow it in. So for your client specifically, who's trying to make more space for herself, I think the first step, besides acknowledging it, which she clearly is doing through the work with you, is to look at what emotion is anchoring her to this rigorous way of being. So then you can do the work to cut it, to cut that emotion, to let it go. Anger, resentment, guilt, shame, rage, whatever it is that has been propelling her forward, that worked to a certain point, but just isn't anymore.
Okay, amazing. And I imagine it takes a little more time to have enough insight to realize which emotion is actually driving it. But what you said some time ago seems like something that would be really accessible to such an ambitious woman, which is that we're not talking about becoming less successful. We're just talking about evolving our definition of success.
Yes, 1,000%. Can I please put you on a poster board for that? I mean, seriously, it really is owning your right to redefine. I mean, why not? People made up all the words that are in our lexicon that we use now, and we abide by them. Why can't you make up your own definition of what success looks like for you and your family, with a dog, cat, a bird, and a frog, right? Like, you don't have to look like someone else. Everyone's saying you got to keep up with the Joneses. Who are the Joneses, and are they even happy? Right? Like, are they really happy people that
right? The Joneses are keeping up with the other Joneses.
Exactly.
Or trying to.
Right? Running in this, what is that little animal that goes
the hamster wheel?
Thank you. The hamster wheel. I'm just not interested in the hamster wheel. And all of my clients feel the same. They're just not always sure how to get off. The same as I'm sure your clients are successful, powerful people that are just ready to optimize in a different way than they've already been doing.
Absolutely. And speaking of optimizing in a different way, I'm very excited because I think you are the first, I'm sure that you're the first guest on my podcast who can speak to us about being a sexological body worker, speaking about optimizing. But before I go into that, I just want to say that I am in a large group, like a few thousand, actually more than a few, but anyway, many thousands of female physicians are in this Facebook group, and different issues come up. And in the context of commenting on someone's post, I recommended that they work with a sexological body worker, which I live in California, and sexological body workers are licensed and legal. And so I don't think they're broadly known, but they're more broadly known than in other parts of the country. And so it was really fascinating to me to see all of these female physicians, including OBGYNs, family doctors, and others who were unfamiliar with sexological bodywork. So since I know that some of those women listen to this podcast, as well as many others, I am excited for you to both give an introduction to sexological bodywork and then tell us how you tie that into the beautiful work you do that you've already described with super successful women redefining success.
Yeah, thank you. There's a range depending on where you trained and who you trained under of what you're allowed to do. And in addition to the state, like we're in New Jersey. I can't believe I just said that out loud on a podcast. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia, people. So if you know anything about Philadelphia, New Jersey, you know that that's not something that you would typically announce. Like I moved from Philadelphia. Hashtag we love New Jersey, kind of. So it's also not accepted here as something that you can do locally, where you're able to not only help people process the emotional challenges or intimacy blocks that they might be having that's impacting their physical ability to engage in any form of sex, because that's not necessarily just penetration. It's all the things related. But you're also certified and able to help them see where the energy is blocked in their body. So because of it, because you're technically able to touch someone and say, okay, here near your groin is where the energy is stuck, or here near your lower back, closer to your coccyx, your buttocks bone, like this is where the energy is stuck. Unfortunately, because our state and federal laws are not all the way caught up, it could be considered the sex work, right? Just the fact that you're physically touching someone.
But let's even dial it back, or maybe I'll give my definition and then you can adjust it. So just to be clear, when someone has a block to intimacy, yes, there is tremendous work that can be done through speaking with a coach, which is the main way that you and I work. And it's incredibly effective and often the only thing that's needed. Then there's also the possibility, which is sanctioned in most or all states. I'm not really speaking from authority, so it might not be correct. But anyway, in most states, energy work is legal, meaning someone can lie down on a massage table, fully clothed. The practitioner is fully clothed and can, like craniosacral therapy is an example of
great example.
Energy work where that can be used to, quote, help the energy flow more easily, let's say in the genital region, which in turn helps with intimacy. And then there's also ways of helping people whose intimacy is blocked, or maybe not blocked, but they just want to expand more and experience more sensations, more flavors of experience in sensual, sexual, genital-based experiences. And there are people trained, as you are, in sexological bodywork, which is essentially a kind of massage for the genitals, but it's not intended to be professional and no turn on, no fantasy, no lubrication. No. Whereas massage in principle is a very professional touch, sexological bodywork is a very professional touch on the part of the practitioner, the body worker doing the touching, but the person receiving it is allowed and encouraged to really allow it to absolutely feel like a sexual touch. And there's something incredible in that experience, because when you are a paying client receiving sexological body work, then you get to focus 100% on your own experience. There's no shame, there's no challenge, there's no confrontation, there's no transactional element. The transaction consists in investing in the attention and expertise of the professional. So I know many women in particular, some men as well, but I happen to know more women who, could they have gone from relatively frigid to quite responsive and having pleasure during sexuality just with a partner? In principle, of course they could have, or just through learning things from touching themselves. But if they and their partner don't know how,
right,
why wouldn't you get guidance from a professional who does? And if there's been trauma, then a sexological body worker is trained to really navigate that. So I just want to lay that very basic foundation and turn back to you. Anything you'd want to adjust or amplify in what I said?
No, you said it perfectly. The only thing I would add is the latter part of where you're going about the trauma, because we hold trauma in our bodies, which is typically why people have such a hard time, even if they feel like they are not rigid and they feel fairly confident in their sexual experiences in the past. Often they are, I'll use this word again, they are the doers. They do for other people, but they haven't really allowed themselves to receive, because certain parts of that reception will trigger the trauma if it's not worked through, which is one of the reasons that I tied it in, because my foundation as a licensed clinical social worker was a trauma expert for almost 2 decades before I even started anything else. I really wanted to help people not just survive the trauma that comes with losing a child, losing a loved one, losing a part of themselves in a violation, whatever that violation may have been. I wanted to be able to help people who not only were able to succeed at that, move forward in a way that they could thrive and not just have to get through the day. Like, whoa, I didn't have a PTSD moment today. Like, that's great. But there's so much more to life than just trying to not trigger your trauma or to not have a bad day. There's so much more beauty and connection and vibrancy in this world with yourself if you're able to explore it and get to that other side. And then, of course, you can create those ripples and those imprints that we were talking about earlier. So for me, that was the tie-in, is how can I learn everything that I can about human behavior and all the pieces, not just from my previous life. My previous chapter was really a trauma specialist. That was my world. That's all I did all day long, was everything related to sexual assault, response therapy, like all of it. But I wanted to go beyond that. So that was my ode to myself of moving forward into my next chapter.
Beautiful. Will you tell a story of a client or, a woman or a couple that you've worked with where you brought in sexological body work and how it served them?
Yes, absolutely. When I think about, there's a few clients, but when I think about one in particular, there were cultural challenges between the two of them. They came from very different backgrounds, very different family dynamics. One person was raised just by her grandmother, who was in her 80s when she took over when her parents died. So there was an 80-plus-year-old, beautiful spirit, beautiful woman who is very assertive. Notice I'm using that word, who was now raising a teenager. And all of the challenges that created for this particular young woman, who then went to college, not having any experiences because her grandmother had a very, hard way of keeping her. I don't want to say that she completely had her in a bubble, but it was very, very close. So her first experience sexually at all was when she was in college with a football player who absolutely had no intentions of doing anything but exploring her body for himself and not for her pleasure. And the next relationship was her husband. So she had walked into this space of not knowing how to ask for anything that she wants, only thinking that sex was one way. It was pleasing the other person, because that was the experience that the football player that was very masculine, right, over alpha, right, about me, do this for me, kind of gave her. And her husband grew up in a 2-parent family home, had multiple explorations, as he liked to point out often, that, he knows what he's doing. He doesn't need any help. So he was in a little bit of resistance of coming to get help, because he honestly felt like he knew everything and he could just be her teacher. But right,
love how I'm going. You and I just chuckle at that. Okay, keep going.
Exactly, right. You already see what I'm thinking. And there was all those dynamics and challenges that, for those of you listening, I'm sure you can imagine when you have a loving person who feels like you are theirs to teach and pour into, but don't feel like you have anything to give to them. So they're closed from the receiving standpoint. He really only signed up because he thought it would make her happy. It would make her better. And this was before I got much more specific about both parties having to come to the process ready and willing. I was just excited to work with couples, period, right? Like in the earlier part of my time. And they were local enough where we could actually physically get together and and do some of the work. The challenge was really him more than it was her, because as much as he kept touting to us, and I'm trying to be careful with my words here, how he was experienced and he knew all the things and he didn't have any blocks and he was fine, he actually had a lot of trauma in his belly and in his chest area from being physically violated in his boarding school, things he had never discussed with his wife, because most men, and I'm sure many of you that are listening have people in your family that you can relate this to, they feel it's a sign of weakness to admit that even if you were a child, something happening to you when you were innocent and completely unable to defend yourself in any way, that it somehow is shameful that you quote unquote allowed, which of course he did not, but that was his interpretation of it. So he had a lot of issues in his chest and his belly that would make him project his ego even more, even into his safe space, which was his wife. So we had to do a lot of work with him to really get him to breathe into that and exhale what was happening. A lot of people don't want to talk about the trauma. You don't always have to talk about the trauma, but in his case, he had shut it up so far in him that it was coming out as near aggression in any conversation that made him feel somewhat vulnerable. It took him back to a place where he was violated. The wife actually being privy to the work, because we worked together, and knowing that, she was able to have a space of compassion for her open up that was closing because she was feeling bullied in their relationship from all the touting that was going on whenever she would just ask for some help or say, no, I really want the light off. And he would just, oh, you're not confident. I need you to step into it. That's not sexy to me. He was shaming her for her trying to figure out a way of how to ask for what she wanted, which she just wasn't empowered to do, quite frankly. So a lot of our work was way more verbal, speaking, talking through, processing. I use a lot of woo, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I'm a spiritual being and I'm very aware of that. So I will bring it in, as well as my clinical tools, my coaching tools, and any other tenets that are necessary to get to the root of the issue. But we had to do a lot of inner child healing with him specifically, as well as her, because what was coming up for her in her body was this fear that she wasn't enough for her lover, which happened to be her husband. She just thought, no matter what I do, it's not going to be good enough. I can't possibly compare to his 20+-ish escapades that he was touting that he had when she had only had the one not so great experience. So that was one of my prouder moments of being able to physically get in and to be able to touch and help and move through. It's also one of the stories that I can gladly say the couple is thriving today. They were having trouble with infertility. Not saying that I was some kind of magic queen, but I'm still waiting for one of their kids to have my middle name. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay. So what a beautiful, inspiring story, and points to so many relevant things. In fact, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I've really enjoyed considering recently, with all of the emphasis on narcissism, and it's a personality disorder, but it really is also, not always, but often, a trauma response. And we just have way less tolerance because the harm caused from that trauma response is so severe. But as a trauma response, it's not fundamentally different than the self-esteem, self-doubt, sense of inadequacy that she had, your client. But I want to, this is how the conversation between you and me go. There's about 50 conversations that we've just planted the seeds for, but I do want to just return to sexological bodywork, because it sounds like what you're describing is really finding the trauma in the body that would be activated in the context of sexual interactions. And the trauma in his case was in his belly and his chest. And you didn't say where hers was, but it's not important in this moment. And that's fantastic. And I just want to say that I'm also very familiar with sexological bodywork, which includes the practitioner having gloves on, various lubes on hand, and the client lies down with no clothes on or just a bra, or, depending on what they're comfortable with. It's a profound experience based in consent, but I just don't want to dilute that it can involve the practitioner's hand in any orifice. We'll just leave it at
Absolutely.
that. And that isn't what you described with these clients. And that's also important to know, that sexological bodywork is not always this super sexy adventure. It's whatever you need to have more access to your wholeness and sensuality. And that might be trauma caught in the chest or belly, and that might be learning to relax while having sensations in your genitals.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you mentioned that for so many reasons, because people, which is probably also why it's not legal in all the states, is people over sexualize the experience by thinking that both parties, both the practitioner and the patient, are just like, having some kind of physical interaction fest of all the things. I can honestly say I have never been turned on in doing any of the work that I do, because I'm coming from a space of, let me hold this space as sacred for your growth, for your breaking free of whatever it is you need to break free from. Now, when you tell me about all the amazing things that happen after I help break you free, I'm completely turned on. What? This is amazing. And I make sure that I go and celebrate that with myself and or my forever lover, right? But in the space, the sacredness of helping someone or someone's get through whatever it is, because sometimes you don't even know until you're in position to do the work. You definitely don't want, and I say this for those that are thinking about potentially coming into the practice, you don't want to assume that this is just all play. There's a lot of play to it, especially for the individual and or couples that you're working with. But that play isn't necessarily for you in the way that you might be envisioning the play to be if you're the practitioner holding
right. This
space.
Is not like a happy ending massage. In fact, another way to emphasize what you're saying is that whatever it is that holds you back in your sexuality, in your sexual experiences, that's exactly what's going to be addressed in the sexological bodywork. So if you are turned on and having a fantastic time, and then you're probably not going to go to see a sexological body worker. But if you get triggered or shut down, or you check out, or you go numb, or your muscles tighten, and even if your heart is open and you want to open your legs, open your vagina, and you can't, those are the things that you would work on with the sexological body worker. And those are the things that are going to come up if the sessions are going to serve you.
Absolutely, on every level. You said it perfectly. That's rare for me not to have words. So this is a good one. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, and when I'm interviewing, I rarely say even an iota of what I've just said, but I'm so grateful to use this opportunity to get to know you, get to know your vibe and all of your beautiful stories and inspiration. And in that context, provide education about sexological bodywork, because my guess is that 96% of those of you listening probably didn't know what we've just shared. So I'm glad for you to be educated, whether or not that's something you would want to pursue at this time. And if it is, you can look at links in the show notes. And also feel free to message me if you're looking for somebody local or whatever it is that you need. I'm not going to go further about that right now, but I would love to ask you, Naketa, who's the woman who should be listening to this and reach out to you? And what do you want to offer?
Yeah, I would say, so I only specifically work with married women entrepreneurs. The way I define married as you're in a monogamous relationship, that's my exclusionary criteria, because that's where my expertise is. And that's who I feel like I work best with, them and their forever lover, whoever their lover may be. But the woman is always an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial spirit. So I do have engineers, lawyers, people who don't tend to define themselves as entrepreneurs, but clearly work very similarly to how an entrepreneur has to work in terms of mindset, tenaciousness, open-mindedness, relationship building, networking, all the things and all the challenges that come with that. A lot of our couples are entrepreneurial couples. So they're both typically in the same mindset space, if not the same position itself. The couple I'm thinking about in particular that are Peruvian, the husband was an engineer previously, started his own consulting firm. The woman was an analytical creative. She worked as a teacher, but had her PhD in philosophy and environmental engineering, but didn't use it because they had kids. And she decided to, put some things on the shelf, then started working with her husband in the business. And that created a lot of interesting dynamics for play for us, curiosity, adventure, making time in the midst of all the busy that they didn't know how to turn down so they could enjoy life and not just constantly doing business. So thank you for asking that question. I would say the married woman entrepreneur who's in a good relationship, it is healthy. It checks all the boxes in terms of safety, fulfillment. We're building our portfolios together, whatever that looks like. You are not knocking on the door of divorce. However, you see that there's space to optimize your marriage. You want to take it from good to great, preferably to blissful. Those are our people.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll have contact information in the show notes. Would you like to share your website or something?
Absolutely. I would go to thigpro.com, and I'm sure the technical spelling of that will be in the show notes, and look forward to, we have a masterclass coming up depending on the time of this release called the Joy Map Method, because we love to activate joy and see if it makes sense for it to go further into the alignment work that we do together.
Okay, fantastic. One last question. So every time you speak about your business, you talk about we. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who is it besides you?
Yeah. So top level, my husband and I are co-founders, co-owners. He's a shareholder who does not work in the business, as he likes to remind me whenever I'm bringing him in the business challenges. He works on the business. He directs all of our graphics, all of our design, all of our creative, how we express ourselves outwards. And then we have a small team of people who also help us, whether they're success architects in some of our women incubators, or my daughter doing an internship with us and monitoring all of the social media down to our virtual assistants. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I love that the work that you're doing fundamentally is generated by you and your husband together. That's really beautiful. And Naketa, thank you as always for the pleasure of a conversation with you.
I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Intimate Marriage Podcast. If you're ready to deepen your relationship and create a truly intimate, delicious, and vibrant marriage, head over to alexandrastockwell.com and choose the program that's right for you.